Hello, everyone, and welcome to this Conversations on Groong episode. David Davidian joins us today to discuss the recently released annual report by the Foreign Intelligence Service of Armenia. Mr. Davidian is a lecturer at the American University of Armenia with extensive background in IT and technical intelligence analysis. David, welcome to the Groong podcast. We're glad to have you back on the show.
Oh, hello. It's great to be here again.
Welcome, David.
Thank you.
Well, David, we wanted to talk to you because you recently wrote an article on shadowdiplomat.com. It's about this newly created agency in Armenia, Foreign Intelligence Service, and their report, which was released, I guess, last week or a few days ago. So we want to discuss the agency itself as well as the points raised in the report. For those that don't know, Armenia's National Security Service was the main agency in charge of both intelligence and counterintelligence, both foreign and domestic. But the Pashinyan regime has been gradually trying to split up the National Security Service, and hence we have the Foreign Intelligence Service headed by this a woman named Christine Grigoryan, who, according to our research, has no experience in anywhere in terms of in that field, and she's the head of that service now. She was the HR ombudsman, if you want to know her previous role, and then unexpectedly resigned, disappeared from public view, and according to various reports, she was visiting the UK at the time for an extended period of time. I'm not sure how veritable those reports are, but um, we know that the Pashinyan regime has been cultivating, or maybe is being cultivated, is the right word, by various foreign intelligence agencies such as CIA or the MI6. He has visited the head of, he has met and visited the head of MI6 and CIA several times. But anyway, I mean, he's cultivating a relationship, not being cultivated. So I don't want to be arrested for saying wrong things here, but Pashinyan has been cultivating a relationship with these agencies. And so after Christina Grigoryan came back from her foreign trip, she was the head of the newly created Foreign Intelligence Service of Armenia. Who is Christina Grigoryan, David? And what can you tell us more about this agency that's created, its mandate and its responsibilities, and what has it produced so far?
Well, I haven't heard anything more than you've already described. What was really amazing was when it was announced. It was announced a couple of years ago, I believe, as an institution. And it was sort of shocking that a country or any established state would announce the fact that they are starting a foreign intelligence service that should have been there from day zero. I guess that was the first marketing flaw. The second marketing flaw was coming out with a report the way they did. Now, it may not make any difference who is the head of the FIS, Foreign Intelligence Service, because their product should speak for itself. And the product has spoken for itself, and it's spoken very poorly.
Well, I think Asbed used I think the phrase eighth grade research paper, but maybe I'm wrong. I'm misquoting him.
Well, Hovik, it would be an
Is
eighth
it
grader using ChatGPT.
Yes.
even worse? But in reality, before we go into the details of the report, what is the need for Pashinyan to create a separate intelligence agency when an existing one exists? You can claim that, well, it has KGB ties, but the fact that remains that the National Security Service has fulfilled every single one of Pashinyan's edicts all this time. Of course, Pashinyan has replaced 6 or 7 heads, but each one seems to be more loyal than the other. And the most recent one, I believe, yeah, I don't recall his name, but he's the one that has been really in charge of going after the clergy and arresting those pesky clergy. forgive me for for using those terms, but yeah, why is there even a need to separate those functions
Well,
from?
yeah, if you have a internal service, that would look something more like an FBI or something like this in the United States. A foreign service is radically different because you could have defense intelligence, you could have diplomatic intelligence, and you could have intelligence that comes from different countries. And it takes a different type of analysis for each one of these things. There's not much analysis if you're an internal police service. You basically follow orders. However, if you put together a foreign intelligence service, one of the reasons you would want a foreign intelligence service is to serve diplomacy, or even better, serve the general strategy that the state has. So there's a big difference. The internal service may have information that would be associated with making the specific police group or whatever, perform, arrests or something like this. However, a defense intelligence organization has nothing to do with, local operations. Now, the NSS sort of mixed these together, and I really suspect that there wasn't any external analysis taking place. If you just look at the number of police on the streets of Armenia, you could see that they have their hands filled just keeping these people from, I don't know.
Yeah, I guess priorities, right? I mean, it's you have to take care of the internal threat.
David, so this FISA report presents a bunch of risk assessments across various domains, and I found a lack of strategic goals, a lack of vision for a national end state, meaning to say that these were risks that were presented, but to what end, to reach what end state? Additionally, it presents them in some kind of a probabilistic scale that it defines. And the table is on page 4 of this report, and we'll link to it from our show notes. That's podcast.groong.org/episode number. But they start with things like almost certain, which is more than 90% chance of happening, down to remote chance, which is less than 10%. But first question, if we don't know the end state that we are trying to reach, how do we know the risks on the path to that end state?
Well, we don't. That's the issue. When I saw the FIS report, it just reminded me of intelligence reports that you would probably see, public intelligence reports. And when there's an issue on the side, there's a percentage that's written, and that's the percentage of confidence, or it's sort of like a weather report. It's 90% chance of rain, but they don't really say where the rain's going to be. Is it 90% of the land, or is 90% of if I just look up? So they just give a number. And that's what it looked like. It almost looked like it was just tacked on together just so they would have risk percentages. However, risk percentages relative to what? They aren't stated. And even worse, these risks aren't categorized. In other words, there's no relative scale given as to what approaches an Armenian red line. And of course, we weren't given any red lines. Sometimes red lines are not specified in such documents explicitly. They're written in a way where you just come up with your own thoughts on a particular item that the report even speaks about. Because if the report speaks about any kind of line or any kind of specific threat, that would be a red line. However, there is no difference between soft power and hard power threats. In fact, the word soft doesn't even come up if you do a search on that on the report. The term soft to soft power doesn't exist. In its place is called hybrid. Hybrid threat. Well, a hybrid threat is a very broad category of this, that. Is it cyber? Is it? However, there are soft threats. For example, if a pressure is put on, let's say, the Armenian government to play down April 24th, the Genocide Memorial Day.
Mhm.
Well, what you may do, for example, is you may claim that you have to rebuild the Genocide Memorial, and in fact, it has been. Well, is that a soft threat? Yes, I believe it's a soft threat. What's the reaction? You succumb to the soft threat. Is that something that contradicts or eats into an Armenian national identity? It is. Well, that soft threat was an external threat. It was never categorized as a soft threat or hard threat or any threat, as an example. So we don't know. There's no relative scale given. Percentages don't mean anything if it's not relative to some
Yeah,
some.
I was trying to understand exactly that because I was going to ask you a little bit like this was a little reminiscent to the color coding that we got in the United States from after 9/11. If you recall, there were red, orange, green, yellow, etc. And nobody really knew what does it mean that we're in an orange state. So what does it mean here? How do you have any inkling as to how they're assigning these probability values? How is something deemed to be a high risk versus something that is a low risk? Do we understand it? Maybe Christina Grigorian does, but what should we understand?
Well, that's part of the problem. And what's worse is this is going to be right. This has been read by foreign intelligence services and diplomats, and they are asking the same questions. Actually, they are probably coming up with answers that we probably would not want to be associated with Armenia.
Are not flattering, right?
Correct. In other words, this is the second marketing error that we had. We come across as if we just did this because you're supposed to do it, whether there's one person or 10, I don't know, high school students involved. In fact, that's what it looks like. If you looked at a typical threat report from like any country in the world, there was pieces of it that you could pull out of theirs, change a few names, and put it in ours. And that's really embarrassing. Whether Christina's involved or Christina or Mistina, it doesn't make any difference. This has come out of the state of Armenia, and that's what it's viewed as.
So the entire point of this report seems to have been to support government press releases that, hey, we are going towards peace. At least that's my reading of it. And I'm going to bring specific example. One of the points in the report was evaluate the risk of military escalation between, different analyze different conflicts around Armenia, and Armenia-Azerbaijan conflict was one of them, of course. And it says it's highly the military escalation is highly unlikely for between Armenia and Azerbaijan, and it's citing the August 8 White House agreements. It's funny because further down in the same report, we read that Azerbaijan has accelerated its war spending by 44% over 3 years. The report also acknowledges that Azerbaijan has been pushing this narrative of Western Azerbaijan, and it says something like, this is a risk for establishing peace. And of course, we are just watching as the region is basically anticipating a huge war between Iran and the US and Israel. But if you read this report, it seems to reach this rosy conclusion that, hey, Armenia's threats, security threats are minimal or moderate or tolerable. Um, what is your take in how they are like, modeling this? Am I missing like I was just at I had a cognitive dissonance when I read the report because I know the facts. They even state the facts in this report. The report basically says, hey, we're going towards peace, you don't have to worry about anything.
Well,
What is your take
yeah,
on some of these facts cited in the report?
it appears as though this report is really wishful thinking. We wish we could write a report like this. Unfortunately, what's happened now that the term Western Azerbaijan is stated in the way it does, that tells our enemies, and we do have enemies, They aren't, competition, like as was stated on the news during the war, as if these aren't enemies. Our enemies are reading this, and we've already made a big deal about this. This is just basically a psyop, a very, very simple psyop. Oh, let's call southern Armenia Western Azerbaijan, and let the Armenians just get all bothered about this. Now, whether this really is an issue, I don't know. I'm not particularly worried. I think this is nothing more than what Azerbaijan has done internally in keeping Armenians an enemy for the past 30 years. This really hasn't changed. And as much as Armenia wants to give the impression that it's for peace, and I mean, I personally would like to have peace, but not at any expense, obviously. The fact that there was basically no analysis of what might transpire on the Turkish border, on the Iranian border, on the Azerbaijani border,
or even the Georgian border,
even the Georgian border for that matter, which is that's a whole other issue. There is no risk there. There's no risk there. And what are the levels? What are the levels if Iran just disintegrates? What will the Pan-Turkists do? We don't know. We have our own ideas, but this is a Foreign Intelligence Service document that really, okay, if something happens, this happens. It almost gives the impression that Armenians are being, or the Armenian government or whatever is being, played with like a puppet someplace.
Mm-hmm.
Say, don't worry about it. Nothing's going to happen. Nothing this, nothing that, as Hovik alluded to earlier. None of these issues are more important than the other. They just stated with a probability. Well, a probability is not a level of importance. That's just a probability of it.
When the basic things like fail the smell test, for me, that's enough to sort of reject the whole thing. So one of the basic things in the doc, it states in black and white that Armenia and Azerbaijan are going towards peace. I mentioned some of the other facts, like the war report spending and so forth. But one thing that I don't know if the report covered is the internal situation in Azerbaijan. Do you believe that Aliyev is now preparing his people for peace with Armenians, even if we, let's say, take their words at face value? I mean, from the sounds of it, like when you're talking about Western Azerbaijan and whatnot, that doesn't seem like it. But maybe I'm wrong. Is Aliyev maybe now a peacemaker?
Aliyev could very easily have started this Western Azerbaijan story for his own people internally.
Right.
You see, this is one of these things. The war is over. Now we have to worry. Before then, Armenians were the enemy. I mean, the Armenians were the enemy from the root right to the top of the tree. In fact, Armenians weren't even considered native of the area. They came from India, or who knows where they came from. All these stories. So now that the war has been Azerbaijan's conquest of Artsakh is finished, now what does he do? Because what would happen is now the people saying, okay, this is done. Okay, how about internal problems that we have in Azerbaijan? Right? All the reporters that are in jail, political opposition that is claimed to be under Russian pressure, so on and so forth. It's not surprising that they would bring this up. Now, there's been no estimation as to, or actually, there's been no analysis in this report, just like you said, as to where this comes from. Is this an issue that was created internally for Azerbaijan? Was it created just for Armenia, or both? It keeps the people in Azerbaijan wondering what's going on. It keeps Aliyev in a position of sort of like this military, in like a military position, whatever. And it also keeps Armenians on their toes. And when we read on social media, the reaction Armenians have to things like, Western Azerbaijan or so on and so forth, whatever, well, it looks like it may be working. in probably both places, Armenia and Azerbaijan.
Yeah.
I think you mentioned earlier the occupied areas. Azerbaijan is still occupied on the order of 200 square kilometers of internationally Armenia recognized land. Well, is that not a threat? It's certainly a hard threat. That's not even a soft threat.
Yeah. What gave more fuel to this thought is that when, for instance, J.D. Vance is coming to the region apparently, and in the announcement it says that he's going to be talking to Azerbaijan about, selling more weapons to Azerbaijan. But for Armenia, there's nothing in terms of military cooperation. It's all about uh, commercial ties and nuclear stuff. And it's also actually, some would say intended to, minimize the influence of the nuclear power station, the Metamor power station currently. But that aside, let's say that there is peace with Azerbaijan, but all of these threats around us, doesn't Armenia still require weaponry? Doesn't Armenia still require, standard military procurement? And I'm just Pashinyan is basically saying that they have reduced the budget because Azerbaijan is no longer a threat.
Well, every country has a right to defend itself, and it should minimize, it should give the impression that it's backing off from that defense posture. Every state has that. If we watched, I don't know, India and Pakistan, they get into something that's almost like a hot war. And in that case, it would turn into a nuclear war very quickly. Well, if one side all of a sudden says, we're going to turn off all our nuclear, we're going to just shut off our nuclear weapons and we're going to, put them in the back, whatever. And because we want peace, how would someone view a statement like that? Well, that's how the world is viewing an Armenia that says, don't worry about us. We want peace. Well, I don't know of any peace that has ever been sustained when there isn't a threat of reprisal if the peace is violated. Peace is not one way. That is a threat against Armenia that Armenia actually accepts. It's an external threat.
It does seem to me like the government has essentially, or rather, this report essentially has put the absence of any kind of a war. If nobody shoots at the borders for a year, then that's going to be a low risk year for Armenia. Essentially, it seems to me that they are assessing the risks to this government staying in power because another war is going to be a detrimental one for them.
Sure.
But speaking of this government, David, it seems like they are, I'm not going to say obsessed, but preoccupied, let's say, with hybrid threats. These are threats like cybersecurity, media integrity, political integrity, but everything that Armenia shows that a hybrid threat is used essentially as a code word for keeping Russian influence down. That's what it seems to me, and increase the Western influence. For example, the Armenian government solicited millions of euros to fight Russian influence in the Armenian elections. I I trust that you see the absurdity of this. Am I the only one thinking that these assessments are relying on fundamentally political premises? For example, there are risks of Russian meddling in Armenian domestic affairs, but there are no risks assessed to the West, for example, meddling. Is this a political and subjective assessment by the report?
Well, the report, it's politics. It's simple politics. It's not
While intelligence should be completely devoid of politics, it should be an assessment along national security lines only.
yes, correct. Because if it's not, how can decision makers use that to um, assess a situation and put together a plan if it's not based on reality? If you're already talking about politics, you've already given the answer. You may not do anything, or you may do something. I mean, the same thing happened in Moldova, right? I mean, there's almost no difference. Moldova was saying, "Oh, there's a Russian threat. There's a Russian threat. There's a Russian threat." The EU came in, basically told them what to do. They kicked out the party that was going to win, and the pro-Western party was installed, and everyone seemed to be happy. Well, if that ever happened in countries who claim they're really democracies, there would be upheaval.
Yeah.
Well, there wasn't an upheaval. In fact, the countries that force that are the ones that claim they're democracies, the EU, in other words.
Yeah. Yeah. As a matter of fact, Maya Sandu was in the news yesterday supporting Armenia and Georgia to, find a democratic future. It's basically saying, kick the Russians out.
Yeah, well, of course, the term democratic doesn't mean what we think it is.
Right,
Just
right.
pro-Western and anti-Russian.
With the TRIPP currently sort of on our minds, and this impending visit by JD Vance, and I guess more agreements being signed, and also the impending war on Iran, it seems like we are bringing Iran's enemies, namely the United States, to Armenia and handing them the keys to Armenia's south. Of course, I'm not even talking about Russia, but how does one objectively evaluate the risks from that move alone in this FISA? And I wonder whether this report talks about that, because I believe that national security, one of the core aspects of national security, is to be able to for Armenia to be able to reach north and south. And my understanding of this TRIPP is basically we are foregoing 100 years, for 100 years, we're foregoing the ability to communicate north and south in reality by, like, building a railway to Iran, or building a railway. I mean, there is a railway north, but if we ever wanted to, for instance, build a railway south, would, even though it's expensive, but I mean, it's not even in the sort of planning phase right now. But if we ever wanted to do that sometime 20 years from now, if the situation between the US and Iran is still inimical, would the US allow even for that to happen?
Well, if they run the border, probably not. You see, what's interesting, Asbed said earlier, just because there isn't shooting doesn't mean there's peace. Or just because there's no war doesn't mean there's peace. There's no definition of what peace is. And even worse, there are no red lines associated with anything that you have mentioned. Losing a border, even if it's run by the United States, and of course, just because there was a Washington Declaration, all it is a Washington Declaration. That's all it means.
It's not even just losing the border. A possible potential breakup of Iran, which is the stated goal of Israel, and or regime change by the United States, is almost an existential level issue for Armenia. And I don't see any kind of a risk ascribed to this. And yet there is a U.S. armada coming close to Iran, and a huge attack is planned. At least that's what they're saying. We're not sure if it's going to happen, but that's the level at which we are talking about. So just any kind of Joe can look at this and say the risk is high, and there's nothing in the report about this.
No, there isn't. It almost seems as though the FAS was given a template, and said, fill in these blanks. And that's what happened. The blanks were filled in. Does that mean that someone has told Armenia, don't worry about Iran, we'll take care of your border? If that's not a threat, I don't know what a threat is. Not only that, but I read that recently that Armenia wants to have the ability to limit imports through Georgia and have it go through Azerbaijan. Well, not only is the southern border an issue, but now is Armenia's northern border going to be an issue at the same time? We are actually causing that. We are causing that. In fact, we're sort of causing both of those, but the northern one particularly. So What kind of threat is that? Have we induced an external threat on ourselves? An economic threat, because that's an economic threat.
Yeah.
Just because you have a threat doesn't mean it's a military threat. There's social, um, there are soft, there are social, there's all sorts of threats, economic threats. And these weren't addressed. These weren't addressed. It's not surprising that people who have read this that I've spoken to claim this at a high school level.
Dave, all three of us have been technologists and are technologists on this. And the Pashinyan government seems to think that IT and AI, these great buzzwords, are some sort of panacea and will turn Armenia into a different nation. There are constant photo ops with IT moguls, even in Davos, for example, data centers, IT infrastructures, nuclear power plants, modular nuclear power plants, all these things that are going around. Tell us a little bit, in a country with very weak IT policy, privacy policy, or at least the practices are almost non-existent. Is all IT good IT? Is there no risk attached to getting all this IT in the country and then suddenly becoming a source of serious civic problems?
Oh, sure there is. For example, if you want to get on the metro, you have to use a special card or a credit card that goes through one particular brand of scanners. All right. Um, well, if that's not a security risk, I don't know what is it. What is? Where does that information go? If
Mhm.
someone wanted to, in fact, when you read the statements of the Armenian government, there's no privacy issues involved here. Well, yes, there are privacy issues involved here. If they want to see who is going to a demonstration or some protest, they'll know the vast majority take. Well, some people walk, and they also have video cameras and things like this as well. Um, but a lot of people take the metro. And there are also other IT related initiatives that no guarantee is given as to personal security. I don't think personal security really exists in Armenia. Now, when you say IT, there doesn't appear to be an IT policy at all.
Mhm.
Um, the Minister of Education or the Minister of Technology can come out and say all sorts of things, and it sounds good because, well, that's what they're supposed to. They're basically sound bites. For example, if there ever is going to be a $500 million data center in Armenia, who is that going to serve? I don't think it's going to serve the average Armenian. I don't think it's going to be collecting data from this part of the world. Otherwise, would you need, now, Armenia has licenses to get the most advanced NVIDIA GPUs in the country. That's assuming that this $500 million data center is going to come to fruition. Even at the universities, we hear IT, AI, AI, as if everything goes through a neural network and you get a magic answer and you go to get a job. There doesn't seem to be any relationship to any goals, strategic goals, or any strategic methods to achieve those goals using any kind of technology. It doesn't. It seems that, well, people are talking about AI, people are talking about data centers now. Okay, that's fine. That's what we should do. If AI isn't a external threat to Armenia, I don't know what is. It could also be a panacea, although I doubt it. I think it's more the former.
Well, I've been concerned about things like this, privacy issues, for example. Most recently, suddenly we had private videos leaked onto Telegram, which the NSS latched onto and arrested people like Archbishop Ashod. It's just unbelievable to not think about what this means. What is the technology being used, and what are the policies that are governing it before people get arrested, thrown in jail, persecuted, and prosecuted?
I have not seen any strategic policies on technology. Sure, learn programming, get a degree, and try to get a job. That's not much of a strategy. And that's sort of what the result of all we really hear. Oh yes, there's going to be all this money being poured into Armenia. Well, there was a lot of money poured into the gold mines in Armenia, and that hasn't really done much for the average person. I have no idea what this data center is going to do. I could just imagine. Um,
Well, I mean, we
data
know from
collection.
the announcements that Armenia could have the ability to use 25% of the data center. I mean, I have to, um,
You mean for
take
Armenian apps and Armenian services?
for whatever, for whatever. Now, whether they use that for good or bad, remains to be seen. Actually, I would, if I'm a betting man, then I would bet it'd be used for bad things, knowing how this government is running
More than
things.
good or bad, Hovik,
So,
I meant to say, is it
yeah.
just going to be a colo site or is it going to be a site for services to Armenian, let's say, research,
you know,
services by the government, whatever?
Yeah, I mean, I think we need to know a little bit more, but regardless, I think that the point is that this AI stuff, it seems to me more like blowing, they say like in Armenia, blowing dust on your face or trying to sort of mask what's really, it's a huge PR thing because if um, you are able to improve the security of your country, the national security, the privacy of your citizens using existing technology. You don't need special NVIDIA chips to do that. And if the current government is, or if the regime is basically a bad custodian of data today, they'll be a 10 times worse custodian of data tomorrow. And what I'm really concerned about, as you mentioned, is all of those, cameras that they're hooking up. They're forcing businesses to install cameras, private businesses to install cameras, and capture sort of street cameras and process these on people without, and we've seen that this government basically has no inhibitions in terms of what both legally and morally it can do. So in the wrong hands, this is the wrong tool, but in the right hands, it could be the right tool. But as David says, there needs to be a strategy, there needs to be a policy, and the policy needs to be executed properly. And we're seeing none of those. I'm sure that actually I have to say something. I was planning on closing here, but I've had over the last 20 years that I've been in and out of Armenia, I've met various different ministers for IT, for so forth. And every time I no longer, of course, I will not visit and meet with this traitorous regime after 2020. But in the past, I have been consulted, and I have also made visits myself. And every time I've gone to the office of the consecutive IT minister, I have been shown a strategy document saying, "This is the strategy document that we're working on for security and privacy in Armenia." And or for IT development, and every time it's a different document, and I have never seen any of those documents come to fruition. And I'm guessing that 5 years from now, you will go and visit the minister. Hopefully, unless the things change, if this regime stays in power, 5 years from now, you're going to go and they're going to promise you another strategy document without really understanding what a strategy document is. I'm not even saying implementing it or trying to put a policy around that.
Yeah, Asbed, just to bring this item to a close, perhaps, the Armenian the Armenian government had to take over the electric grid by putting the person who was in charge of it, who ran it very well. They had to arrest him and nationalize it. If that's the first step in putting together a data center that's supposed to be good for the people, just so you don't have a Russian dual citizen or citizen involved, probably tells you what the government will probably allow that data center to do, just to stay best friends with those that don't like Russian influence in Armenia.
Well said. Well said. Answers the question whether this whole report has a political tinge to it, or is it just a national security assessment.
Yeah. Expect
If
to
it
be
is,
called a hybrid threat
yeah,
from now
if it
on.
is, then we're really doomed.
If I ever played a musical instrument and I formed a band, I would call it the hybrid threats. I don't know if that name was ever taken, but we should we should I got dibs on it. But anyway. All right. Well, thank you for joining us, David, today. This was an interesting discussion, and hope you come back soon and talk to us about more positive things.
Sure. It was my pleasure, guys. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you, David.
Bye-bye.
That's our show today. The episode was recorded on January 28th, 2026. We've been talking with Mr. David Davidian, who is a lecturer at the American University of Armenia. He has spent over a decade in technical intelligence analysis at major high technology firms. He resides in Yerevan, Armenia. A compendium of his articles can be found on shadowdiplomat.com. Check him out through our show notes, podcasts.groong.org/episode number.
All right, folks. Thanks for staying with us, and like, comment, and share. I want to give our viewers a sneak peek at what we're trying to do. So, we are constantly talking about politics, but we have been talking to a historian, and we have decided that we're going to be preparing, or we're going to be piloting some podcasts on specifically in terms of history. It's not the first time we did it, but maybe it could be its own series. So we are working on our first episode, and given that we're all excited about this, including the historian friend we will introduce next week. It seems like we can do more. We can diversify into historical episodes in the future.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
not my,
Just like a little bit like the critical corner, which is sort of in flight. We've done a couple of episodes in the last month, but we will have a history playlist of some sort. We won't give you too much information so that it's a little bit of a pleasant surprise when it comes along.
Yeah, and of course, we're now talking about which episode in Armenian history to talk about. And it's funny because when you're talking about, let's say, US history, you could probably do several episodes, right, on a decade in the US. And we're forced to cover thousands of years of history. And, we're talking about like different options. We're talking about Mesrop Mashtots. We're talking about mostly medieval Armenian history for now, like Vartanants, battles, and so forth. We're trying to figure out which topic to start with first. And once we do, though, even the topic of Vartanants could be a topic of 10 episodes, in my opinion, not just one. So, anyway, some things you can maybe look forward to, and we'll see how it comes along.
Yep, fun stuff. But once again, share our shows. If you are listening all the way to this point in the show, that means you are a hardcore listener. You love our material. That's why you're listening all the way to the end. Your share of helping us can be to share it with your friends and tell them, hey, this is something that you want to listen to, because that helps us a lot. Thank you so much. I'm Asbed Bedrossian in Los Angeles.
And I'm Hovik Manucharyan in occupied Yerevan.
We'll talk to you soon, folks. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.